Hi, and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer. All week long, we have been talking about aviation, and I am excited to have in studio with me Chris Swathwood. He's the Vice Chairman of Colorado Aviation Business Association, better known as CABA. We also have Kelly Sloan of Sloan and Associates with us to talk about some legalese with some bills that we've got out there in the aviation industry. So welcome, guys. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. Well, let's kick off this conversation. Tell us exactly what CABA is, Chris.
Yeah, so Colorado Aviation Business Association, or CABA, we're a grassroots effort in the state of Colorado to help promote and educate the general public on both business and general aviation across the state and its important economic impact that it plays in our state economy.
Absolutely. And so I've been told that there are 74 public airports. That's correct. And only 14 of those cater to commercial airlines. So that leaves us over with about 60 airports across Colorado. And you guys touch a lot of those, don't you?
That's correct. We touch all 74 of them, but most of our operators are based within those 60 airports in the state.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump into these bills. Tell us a little bit about that, Kelly.
So, so with Sloan Associates, I represent Colorado Aviation Business Association, also the Agricultural Aviation Association, and the Colorado Seaplane Initiative. So, on behalf of the Aviation Business Association, we're running a bill this year. It's House Bill 1083. It's a sales and use tax exemption for on-demand aircraft. Chris can talk a little bit more about some of the details, but essentially what it does, currently there is a sales and use tax exemption for commercial airlines, scheduled commercial airlines, people like United and WestJet, operations like that, for the purchase of their aircraft. That doesn't exist for the rest of the commercial aviation segment, the on-demand carriers. Those are charters, air ambulance, people like that. Any public use aircraft that's not scheduled, they're on demand. So what this bill does is it kind of gets rid of that dichotomy, kind of gets rid of that unequal tax treatment, and puts the entire commercial aviation industry on the same tax playing field. What it does is it says that if you purchase an airplane for placement onto a Part 135 on-demand air carrier, that it's then free of sales and use tax for the time that it's on use with the Part 135. As soon as it comes off and goes back into private use, then that's a taxable event. So what this does is essentially says, look, if you have an airplane for business purposes, it's it's how you make money, that should be tax free. If it's a private airplane, for you to fly to your around to golf courses or whatnot, that should be taxable. Reason we're doing this is because for the Part 135, which again those charter operations and air ambulance folks like that, some of the fire aviation as well fall under, is it Part 125 is the heavy fire aircraft. Because Colorado's what they call a flyway state, which means that if you purchase an aircraft here and the aircraft leaves within 170 days, it's then you don't pay sales or use tax on it. So we don't get a lot of aircraft that are staying in the state, creating, with these businesses, creating jobs, creating revenue, creating business within the state. They're going elsewhere, or they're being based elsewhere. So we have this huge demand, with all our mountain communities. We have a lot of the rural hospitals closing. There's a lot more demand for air ambulance, but it's getting hard to meet that because our businesses in the state can't keep aircraft here because they're going elsewhere, either just states that either don't have a sales and use tax or have a bill similar to ours. So what we want to do is put the Part 135s of charters on the same competitive footing as the commercial airlines, give them the same tax treatment, and encourage some of these operators to move their aircraft back in the state and to give them the opportunity to be able to lease new aircraft.
And to kind of talk a little bit more about what Kelly's saying there, we're really looking at this and people see it's a tax cut or a tax exemption, and that's really not the idea of the bill. The bill is really designed as a jobs bill. And again, as Kelly mentioned, a lot of these guys are moving their aircraft outside of the state. If you look at our surrounding states, you have Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Oklahoma, and Arizona, and even California, who have sales and use tax exemptions for on-demand operations or have no sales tax at all within the state. So what we end up seeing is a lot of these aircraft are positioned outside of the state, and with them the jobs that go there. On average, in CABA, we surveyed in 2017 the on-demand air carriers in the state of Colorado, and we found that on average, for an average aircraft they operate, it's 5.26 jobs to maintain that aircraft. And that's not just pilots, that's not just flight attendants that are on these aircraft. These are sales jobs, these are maintenance jobs, and other office staff that are required to keep that operation going. So really what we're looking, and the objection of this, or object of this goal, or this bill, is to bring those aircraft back into the state, and with them those jobs.
Yeah.
And then of course there's a trickle-down effect to that as well. If you bring in more aircraft in the state, these aircraft need hangars. So now we're talking about construction jobs. They need catering for the clientele that are on board. So now we're talking about, we around an airport we have an area of influence, is what we call. The airport influences that area. And this creates different jobs in that area, such as catering, hotels, and other services as people come in and utilize these on-demand air services. So that's really what we're looking at, and you know, just some basic numbers from that survey was that on average, the salary jobs for a single aircraft come in, and this is a smaller cabin class aircraft, you're looking at $550,000 per year, so over $500,000 for just salaries for a single aircraft. If we start looking at a larger cabin class aircraft that can serve a little bit longer distance, we start looking at $650,000 or more in jobs that are coming in to support that aircraft. So really, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to level the playing field again with the on-demand air carriers and allow them to get the same tax break that the scheduled, which we call FAA Part 121 operators, trying to give them that same playing field again so that they can be competitive in the marketplace.
Wow, this is fascinating. What were you going to say?
Well, and I think that, you know, that's the important thing to note about this bill. You know, in terms of tax policy, you see a lot of tax policy, you hear about a lot of tax policy both in the state and in Washington, where, you know, you have people in industries, business groups are looking for their own little carve-out within the tax code. That's why our tax code has grown from, you know, a few pages
it's over
to
2,000
exactly,
pages,
you know,
right?
Yeah, this table probably wouldn't hold the people hold the federal tax code, and that's not even touching the state, state tax laws. What this is not a carve out, and we specifically drafted this bill and, you know, approached our bill sponsors with this bill to not be a carve out. All we want to do is to make sure that our segment of the industry is treated the same way in terms of tax policy as the rest of the industry. So it's kind of an equalization more than anything else. We're not using the tax code like you see some other industries do to try and influence behavior. You know, we're not trying to create demand through use of the tax code. Demand is out there. You know, it's already something that, you know, our industry can meet. But right now there's a barrier in the way, an artificial barrier that puts them at a competitive disadvantage and puts our state at a competitive disadvantage compared to other states. So I think that's a really important thing for people to note, is that this is not a tax policy that's really structured to create any kind of special treatment for our part of the industry. It's to make sure we're treated the same as everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, and I like that you said, you know, it's not going to create jobs. The demand's out there. It will essentially create jobs, yes.
Right.
But that's not why you want this tax bill to go through.
Well, yeah, the jobs will follow.
Right.
You know, the jobs will follow. So in that sense, it's definitely a jobs bill. It's definitely an economic development bill, but only in the sense that it's removing an artificial obstacle right now.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you do have some sponsors. I'd imagine there's quite a few sponsors for this bill. Would you like to?
There's going to be. So so your listeners know, of course, that you can only have two prime sponsors in each chamber, which we do, and it's a bipartisan bill. You know, this isn't a Republican versus Democrat thing.
Not at all.
In the House, we're proud to have Representative Tracy Kraft Tharp is our prime sponsor, working with Representative Lang Zayas. Representative Kraft Tharp, of course, you know, she's from the Arvada area, and she also has Rocky Mountain Regional Airport is part of her district. So she understands, you know, the importance of aviation, and general aviation in particular, to not only to the state, but of course, to your constituents. And Representative Zayas, of course, most of you probably know he is a pilot himself, so
Yes.
he understands the aviation industry. And then over in the Senate, we have Senator Jack Tate down Centennial. Of course, he has Centennial Airport. Same thing. He recognizes, quite quite fully the impact that general aviation has on the state's economy. And Senator Angela Williams from Denver. So.
Okay.
We have a good broad coalition. Several supporters in both chambers. We've gotten great support on it through committee. We passed a business committee 10-3. We passed a finance committee 9-4, and it should be up in appropriations later this week or perhaps early next week. And I think we'll do fine there as well.
Fantastic. So is your outlook good for this bill to pass?
I think so. We don't have it doesn't have to come with a large fiscal note, of course. Because
Right.
The whole impetus of the bill was that look, we aren't seeing these aircraft getting placed on leases in the state, so the state's not going to be losing out on a whole bunch of money by with this tax exemption. And of course, the state will ultimately be gaining. It's going to be a net benefit for the state with the increased income taxes, the increased property taxes on that hangar space, so on and so forth. But it does have a small fiscal note, so we shouldn't have any problems in appropriations. And we have a lot of folks in both parties again recognize the value of aviation to the state's economy, and a lot that understand that look, this is not really tinkering with the tax code. We were getting some opposition by some folks that don't really understand how aviation works, and they see they were looking at this. Hey, is this a tax break for the Donald Trumps of the world? With their private
airplanes, yeah.
And of course, it's not. These are small business business aviation. Chris can talk a little bit more about the distinction between the Part 91, which are the Bill Gateses of the world that have their personal Learjets. But that's not who this is targeted for. This is targeted to businesses, and if it is on a lease, and again, a lot of these businesses can't afford to outright purchase their own aircraft, so they rely on leasing from owners. Well, as long as that aircraft is on a lease with a business, with a commercial on-demand air carrier, it's going to be tax-free. But as soon as it's pulled out of that lease, as soon as it becomes a private airplane again, then that's taxable, and that's how it should be.
Absolutely. Do you want to give us some nuances there about the differences between those aircraft?
Yeah, so when we're talking about this, we're talking about FAR, and the FARs are the Federal Aviation regulations that we all deal with as aviators and working in aviation. So this bill is really going to focus on the Part 125s, 133s, and 135s. Those are what we call on-demand air carriers, meaning they are a public use, public consumption aircraft, whether it's for cargo, carrying passengers, air medical, or firefighting. Those are all for public consumption. It's not your Part 91, as Kelly mentioned there, which is, if you take up your private plane to go fly, or a lot of corporations that have their own flight departments and use these as business tools are operating under the envelope of Part 91. So again, we're focusing on the on-demand guys, and also to separate that out from the commercial. While they're commercial, a lot of people refer to commercial as what we call Part 21. That's a scheduled air carrier. Those are your Uniteds and what you see out at DIA. So that kind of breaks down the difference of them. And again, as you mentioned at the beginning, we have 74 airports in the state of Colorado.
Right.
14 of those are served by the scheduled air carriers. We have 60 airports that are not serviced by anybody but the on-demands. And that's really a critical point, because we have a lot of industry. And again, this goes back to that area of the airport's influence. We have a lot of oil and gas industries in the state and agricultural in the state that rely on these rural airports to increase business and economics within that area. So, as we were talking before the show, there's a lot of guys that are flying, it's not executives that are on these planes all the time.
Right.
We can see the oil workers that may live in the metro area and need to get to a remote oil rig to fix it or do some work on it are now being put on these aircraft. And I've seen guys get off that are just soaked in oil and dirt and mud because that's their only way to get out to those rigs. So really, this is going to help a lot of these rural communities throughout Colorado and also bring additional tourism into those areas.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, anytime you talk about aviation, right, those areas of influence, it's going to exponentially increase if you're able to get more aircraft in there, period, right? Well, I think this is a fantastic bill. If I were in the legislature, I'd totally vote for it for you guys.
Well, thank you. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that.
Unfortunately, my reach isn't that far.
No, maybe we can change that.
We do have another bill here, though, that you guys brought to my attention as well. It's this drone interference bill. So, as we all know, drones are becoming more and more popular, whether that's for a business, whether it's for, you know, your own personal backyard use. I'm pretty sure that there's a kid next door to me that's got one, and he drives me crazy with it. But tell us about this drone interference bill.
Yeah, so on this bill, first of all, you may ask, well, why is CABA involved if we're business and commercial aviation? And I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
And outside of, I'm a jet broker during the day and work in business aviation, but I'm also a drone operator. And the drone sphere, if we'll go that, has really changed because it does require an FAA license, Part 107 license, in order to operate a commercial drone. And they really are becoming a commercial and business aviation within their own right. So for us with CABA, it was a big step for us to get involved with this bill and to be able to help, and not only representing manned aviation, but also as a drone operator myself, being able to take both of those and say, hey, we can create some common sense legislation that will really help both industries on this. And I'll let Kelly talk a little bit more about the nuances of the bill here.
So the impetus of the bill, as both of you mentioned, drone use is climbing exponentially within the country. They're becoming more available, not only to personal recreational users. Obviously, the commercial use is expanding phenomenally as well. But as the price point comes down, as it become more available, a lot more people are using them for, going up and taking pictures and just doing their thing with them. And you combine that with YouTube, and you got a lot of people out there looking for their 15 minutes of fame. And
Yes.
Where do you get most of your good shots are going to be emergency type situations, whether they're some kind of police operation, fire, an accident on the highway. It's the kind of the train wreck syndrome. Everybody wants to, nobody admits it, but everybody wants to see this stuff.
I really only watch people falling down on YouTube, so I'm hoping for more drones to catch that.
Yeah, well, but what we're seeing, with the increase in these drones being up there, is they're starting to interfere with public safety operations. The impetus for the bill was the emergency medical community. Some folks with a UHC Health up in Fort Collins who were operating air ambulance, like we mentioned before, with the on-demand carriers. Well, you have to remember, an air ambulance helicopter, Flight for Life, it can't take off if there's something else in the airspace. So if you've landed at scene of an emergency, a traffic accident, what have you, you're loading somebody up that needs critical care quickly. That's why you have air ambulance. They need to get to the hospital in a very short time period. If you have somebody with a drone up there that maybe shouldn't be there and is trying to get pictures, trying to do his thing to take some video for YouTube, the helicopter can't take off. And if you have somebody bleeding out in the back, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Also, they can't land if there's somebody in the air. Looking at it from the fire standpoint, there's been several cases of the wildfires in California recently, where, and Chris can tell you a little bit, with his drone, he works with the fire department out in Evergreen, doing spotting, doing some things that you can't do from the ground, and that maybe a manned aircraft can't do. So there's been times when those firefighter-related drones have had to land because somebody else is in the airspace, and they can't risk a collision and making a bad situation worse.
Right.
Speaking as former law enforcement, I know, unfortunately, we didn't have to deal with it back when I was involved with them. But if you have a situation, for example, a barricaded suspect or an active shooter, and you're doing some kind of tactical operation from outside a building, you have a drone hovering up there, that's relaying your positions to somebody inside.
Yeah.
That's an issue. Less dramatic. I know the police are using drones a lot now for traffic accident investigation, because they can take pictures, so they can get everything cleaned up in a lot sooner than they ever used to.
Yeah.
They can get them up there, get the pictures taken, and then they're out of there. Well, again, you can't have two things operating in the same airspace.
Right.
So if somebody's up there taking their pictures, they have to put this down, and while that may not be necessarily putting anybody's lives at risk, other than the the detour for traffic, it certainly creates some issues with convenience. With now they're going to have to be there a lot longer, and creating the slow down traffic flow. So these are just some of the situations we're running into with drones that are actually putting people's lives at risk if they're being operated irresponsibly. So what this bill does is it kind of expands the definition of obstruction. It's built to allow a Class 2 misdemeanor for obstructing an emergency operation, a public safety operation with a drone. It's basically saying that, look, if you have a drone, you can't interfere with ground operations involved with public safety, fire, medical, police, and you can't interfere with fire, medical, or police aircraft. Now there is a little bit of an out in there that if you're, because we realize in this day and age there's going to be people that are allowed to be there, whether they're press, anybody's welcome to video the police. I know they don't like it very much, but that's it's a First Amendment issue. And there's commercial drones that may be traversing nearby the area. All the bill says is, look, if you're going to have a drone in the area, make sure you coordinate with whoever the incident commander is on the ground, and comply with any instructions. If they tell you, look, we can't have you in this area because we're trying to get an air ambulance in, we can't have you in this area because we have an active shooter, we're going to have our aircraft come through here. I'll give you another scenario that happened with the on the fire side. It was down in Durango, I believe it was last year. A tanker that was coming in fairly loaded, drop retardant. Again, a drone in the area, so now they had to climb and then drop the retardant too high for it to be of any use. Now you're wasting $8,000 to $12,000 in retardant. Plus, it's not doing anything. You've not. And again, those retardant drops are mostly to support the ground operations. So now you're putting the firefighters' lives at risk on the ground. So there's a lot of pieces to this. But what the bill's saying that is, if you're going to be in the area, make sure you coordinate with the commander on the ground and comply with any instructions. It's a very straightforward bill that it doesn't restrict the drone operators' right to do their business or to even be in the area. It's just saying, look, let's have, use some common sense about it. And if you're going to persist in being in the area, then it does give local law enforcement some tools to use to try and prevent this in the future.
Yeah. Any comments on that?
Well, and one of the big things, again, this is a real education bill for a lot of people. Again, the FAA regulates the airspace, and that's up to 400 feet that drones are operating in. And obviously, we can't go out there and tell them they can't fly in the federal airspace system, federal preemption issues. But this isn't telling them, hey, you can't fly. This is just, under the FAA, it's a see and avoid issue. But for most people, they don't know that medical helicopter that's 10 minutes out, they can't hear it yet. So they don't know that a helicopter's coming in. So this allows law enforcement and emergency workers to come in and say, hey, here's what we've got going on. Can you just put your drone over there for now and stay over there, or land it for 10 minutes so our helicopter can get in? We're not saying you can't be there, just stay over there so that we can save people's lives and not put people's lives at jeopardy. So.
Yeah, I have some more questions for you, but we're going to take a quick break here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. We are having such an exciting discussion here today on aviation. We've been talking about aviation all week, and just a reminder, I have in studio with me Chris Swathwood. He's the Vice Chairman of Colorado Aviation Business Association, as well as Kelly Sloan of Sloan and Associates. And you may have noticed we have another person here with us. This is Ray Hawkins. He is the Colorado State Field Director of the Colorado Seaplane Pilots Association and the director of the Seaplane Initiative. And when you think Colorado, you definitely don't think seaplane, but we're going to get back into that momentarily. We did want to finish up our talk with this drone interference bill that you guys have been working on, and we left off before the commercial talking about the public safety and how people don't know necessarily that there's going to be a medical helicopter coming out and they're playing with their drone, and how to make sure that they're paying attention to that. Chris, give us some advice on what you do. You do have a drone yourself.
Yeah, so I do have a drone. I actually have a drone company up in Evergreen, and most of our stuff is GIS mapping and 3D modeling, and then occasional photography. But we also volunteer our services for search and rescue, fire detection, lightning detection, with several of the fire agencies up in the Foothill area, as well as assisting Jeffco Fire and Jeffco Sheriff's Department when they need assistance, and have even done accident investigations for the Colorado State Patrol. So for me, understanding this bill and getting called in to help with it made a lot of sense, not only as a commercial drone operator, but also as someone that's had to land a drone because another drone has entered the area. So again, going back to the bill on this and really focusing on this, a lot of departments are using drones, as Kelly mentioned earlier, and they do have to land those if something else enters the airspace, as well as their manned aircraft. But again, we're not looking to get people in trouble with this bill. This is, again, education. A lot of guys, as Kelly mentioned, don't know that a drone or that an incident may be going on in the area, or that air assets are coming in, and they're flying their drone, and there's no horrible intent to do it. But this allows local law enforcement to be able to approach them and talk to them and say, hey, we've got a situation going on. Can you please move your drone, as I mentioned earlier, to another area, or can you land it so that we can tend to the victims of the incident and get them out of there. And really, again, we don't want to get anybody in trouble. We've seen a lot of bad press lately with the hobbyists and the drones in the news doing things that are just not smart. And us as a commercial drone community, we don't condone that activity. And we felt this was a bill that we could really get behind, and there's many in the drone community that are behind this bill. We think it's some real common sense legislation to really kind of help educate and protect the public. And drones are continuing to grow and be used by law enforcement agencies, and this is just one more step to help protecting the public with it.
Interesting. And one of the things that I believe that we wanted to talk about here, Kelly, was the sorry guys, I lost my train of thought.
It's an emerging field.
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
Goodness gracious. All right, thanks, guys. Ready? So this is an emerging field, right?
It is, yeah.
It's, fairly new, and it's something we're going to have to work around. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is. It kind of reminds me a little bit. I hate making the connection, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the marijuana bills you've been seeing last few years in marijuana law. It's something that they've since that became legalized. The legislature has had to be dealing every year with how they treat with taxation, how they treat it in terms of public health, all these kind of things. How it that's relates to the rest of the business world. Well, it's going to be the same with drones. As they become more available and more people have them, and they're being used more by hobbyists and by commercial businesses and by public entities. There's going to be issues arise. This is one of them. What we like about this bill is it's very narrowly tailored. It's focusing, kind of laser focused on what this particular problem is with the interference. As you mentioned, prior to this bill, if you do have a situation where you have a drone in the area that may be interfering, and the state patrol or sheriffs or whoever goes up to you and says, hey, can you get this out of the area so we can land an air ambulance, or So we have our aircraft come through. We have a fighter. You stay out of the air. There was no, if somebody said, no, to heck with you, and they kept flying around, there's no recourse. You can't shoot them down. They're aircraft. You can try and charge them under existing obstruction statutes, but those don't really cover you because you're not obstructing somebody physically on the ground.
Right.
That wasn't covered. So this is kind of a new area, and we're going to see more of it. We're going to see some issues, probably with property rights and drones that we're going to have to deal with. You're going to see some more coming up on in years to come on law enforcement use of drones. You're going to see some stuff come up on what law enforcement can do about potential problem drones. If they see one that's a threat. This could, like you said, it's an emerging field. This is something we're going to see legal and political issues with for quite some time. And it's exciting to be involved with it. At this early stage. But it's definitely something I think the commercial drone industry, as Chris mentioned, is going to want to make sure that they're in front of, and that they kind of take a reasonable and cooperative approach to. I don't think we want the drone issue to become like we've seen with some other issues in the state, like the gun issue, where neither side wants to is willing to compromise at all.
Right.
You see that, unfortunately, maybe a little bit of the energy, energy stuff too. We don't want it to become an us versus them. I think we want it to, especially from the commercial operator side, the folks that do this for a living, that they want to cooperate. They want to make sure we don't have something too draconian happen. That's going to basically ground us or make it stacks of red tape. Really egregious process to try and to operate their equipment. But I think one thing everybody does recognize is that if we don't deal with something before we have a bigger problem, if we don't deal with it now, there is going to be we could see somebody killed. God forbid. Once that happens, then we're going to lose a lot of control over that debate. So I think it's important for the drone industry, commercial and hobbyist alike, but especially for the commercial operators, the business operators of these drones, to get ahead of this right now, to be part of the conversation, and make sure we can get some good legislation. I think we have that here with House Bill 1314.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll see more bills come along. As you said, this is new. It's one of the closest ways that we can get to flying, right? We can see things that we've never seen from angles before. Right. It's very exciting. You did mention a few times that hobbyists are not having great behavior. Do you have an example of that?
It falls on both sides of the aisle, but I think the most recent thing that we've seen was, unfortunately, and there's some ramblings that it may be a faked video, but it still sends the wrong message to the general population. And that was a Frontier flight going into Las Vegas, where a racing quad went up and flew directly over the aircraft on final approach. And that happened just a few months ago. And now, again, a lot of us in the drone community are starting to think that it is fake video.
Okay.
But for the general population, they don't know that. All they see is a drone going up over an aircraft. And whether it's fake or not, it sends the complete wrong message
Absolutely.
of what the commercial operators are trying to do, who are out there trying to save lives, who are, whether they're doing real estate photography, search and rescue, or are doing some mapping. And even there was just an article on some amazing technology that just came out with drones for archaeological digs, where they're flying ground penetrating radar in areas they could never get before. So the industry is really growing, and it's just we just need to continue to stay ahead of it and help to form legislation that will protect the industry and the population.
Absolutely.
And make sure we don't get too much.
Understandable. Well, we're going to turn this conversation, and this is quite an interesting bill, and as you said, we'll tend to see more, so hopefully we get this one passed for you as well. It's
going to be up in committee tomorrow the 12th.
Oh, okay.
So, in business committee.
Fantastic. So. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. So thank you, Ray, for joining us and letting us continue our conversation from the last segment, but we are going to talk about seaplanes, and you are, again, the Colorado State Field Director for the Colorado Seaplane Pilot Association, as well as the Director for the Seaplane Initiative.
That's correct.
Yeah, just give us a little bit of your background and how a gentleman into seaplanes wound up in Colorado.
Well, it's a long story, but it's a wonderful story in that we were talking here about some of the cutting edge stuff that happens in aviation, some that legislation is having to be made simply because it just has never existed before. But seaplanes have existed for a long time. In fact, they're one of the oldest forms of aviation there is. You had mentioned at one point during the break that you had been a flight attendant on an airline. The first airliner in the entire United States was a seaplane. It flew from St. Petersburg to Tampa, Florida. Cost $4 one way. And it's one person at a time, of course, but it was a seaplane that did that. And so we're not asking for anything that's new and earth-shattering or anything like that. We're looking for just to have the same rights that any other person might have on the waterways here in Colorado. Well, my whole story really begins back about 8 years ago, whenever I was looking to add a certificate to my rating. I've been a flight instructor since 1971, and was coming up due on a flight review every 2 years. Pilots have to do that. Well, I thought I'd add the seaplane rating to my licenses.
Why not?
Yeah, it was going to be a wonderful adventure, I thought.
But
yeah. As I started looking around here in Colorado, I was living up in Longmont at the time, I found out not only could I not get the rating here in the state, I couldn't even get a ride in a seaplane in the state. And the reason being is that seaplanes were not allowed in Colorado. In fact, Colorado is the only state in the union that does not allow seaplanes to operate on any public waterways.
Interesting.
I thought so, and I thought it was because of a lack of knowledge. Obviously, we are in a situation here where you don't see a whole bunch of seaplanes. It's not like Alaska, Florida, or Minnesota, for that matter, where the seaplanes are all over the place.
Rampant, yeah.
All right, so I started working with the state park system. I thought, people just don't know anything about seaplanes, so let's get an event going here in Colorado where we can bring in a few seaplanes and let people just see what they're all about. Well, I ran into a brick wall, and I kept running that brick wall. And as an old military man, I know about the chain of command, so I was doing the steps up the chain of command. And at every point, the answer was not, let's study this or let's look into it, but it was no. Absolutely no. We will never allow that. So I got all the way up through the state parks. In fact, I'd gone to the State Park Commission, and I thought that they were at least listening at one point, because they had said they were going to look at studying it. And they said, well, we'll have a report done, and then we'll come back in about 4 months, and we'll see what we can do. And the answer then was no. It wasn't, let's look further into this, or we need more information, or anything like that. It was just no. So that's when I started looking at doing some legislation. About 3 years ago, we introduced a bill that basically mirrored what the state of Texas had done. The state of Texas had said that if you allow a powered boat on your waterways, then you cannot restrict it against seaplanes without justification.
Seems logical.
And so I thought that was a good way to go, and I, in my naivete, found a person that was willing to help sponsor it. We wrote it down as best as we could, mirroring what Texas had, and immediately got shot down in the very first committee.
Oh.
The vote wasn't really even all that close, and quite frankly, I thought that all people need to do is know about this, and they would agree with me. And of course, it's not that simple.
Not at all.
Yeah, so that's when I got introduced to Kelly, and Kelly has helped me. First of all, he came out with a wonderful plan on this is a step-by-step process that will help you be able to get to your goal. And last year we had another bill introduced, and Kelly had convinced me that the proper way to go would be to set it up as a pilot program so that we could easily, step by step, move into The answer was no. We went to the committee, and they listened patiently, and at the end they said no. And it wasn't at that time. I believe it was more because we had not educated as many people as we needed to. And we've been spending the entire year talking to legislators, to local people, to anybody who would be willing to listen, to be able to explain how seaplanes is a tremendous benefit to an area. It's not just a recreation.
Well, no.
But it's a recreation with a purpose. For instance, one of the things we also talked about briefly was the fact that pilots are becoming more and more scarce. One of the airlines had to shut down routes simply because they did not have pilots to be able to fill the seats. We're looking at being able to provide a training platform for people to learn in a very fun and friendly and most enjoyable atmosphere to be able to be pilots. Also, we're looking at the ability of having seaplanes serve the community. Not only in the fact that there's a lot of places that are inaccessible by roads, or even if you can access it by roads, it's hours to be able to get to a facility such as a hospital. And we can get people there in a matter of minutes, no matter where they are in the state.
Yeah.
Of the 2,000 lakes that are in Colorado, and that sounds like a lot,
Yeah.
103 of them are of a size that seaplanes could actually use if they were allowed, but they are not. And so we're looking at such things as trying to introduce the seaplane as a firefighter. In a lot of places in the country, there are scoopers that are able to hit the water, fill their tanks up within seconds, be able to hit a spot fire. Around here, we have a lot of activity of high base thunderstorms during the summer, where lightning will come down and strike a tree and begin a fire that is way out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody can get to it.
Yeah.
A seaplane can be there in a matter of seconds and be able to get the water, hit that tree, and keep hitting it until ground forces can get in to make sure it's completely out. We don't have that capability here.
We have a lot of fires.
We do.
Yeah, we have a high fire rate here.
And so it's an ongoing battle. Not only are we trying to create a recreation that people would really love. I mean, this is fun.
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity now to be able to get into a seaplane and actually splash on the water. And
oh, wow.
It is tremendous fun. You giggle all the way through it seems.
Yeah, well, and the only, you know what I associate with seaplanes is Indiana Jones when in that very first scene.
Yeah, I don't like snakes either.
But I would imagine, it seems like a great recreation and plenty of use, including emergency use, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us a little bit about this bill that you've got planned now.
Well, I'll let Kelly introduce the information on it, because he is working right now with Senator Ray Scott and helping to develop the wording of it such that it is beneficial to everybody.
Right. Yeah.
Well, first, for a little bit of background, thanks mainly to Ray's inexhaustible efforts. There are 2 private lakes in the state that we now allow seaplanes. It's Lake Meredith down by Ordway, and Kenny Reservoir up by Rangeley.
Yeah. Now, it's not the 103, but those 2 are thankful because of you. So congratulations on that win.
Absolutely. And whenever we have a few moments, I'll tell you a little bit about an event that we have that's going to be starting there very soon.
Fantastic.
Well, and one of the benefits of having those 2 private lakes open is we've been able to address some of the issues that have cropped up with this. So, Department of Natural Resources, their main objection over the past few years has been the spread of risk of the spread of aquatic nuisance species, in particular the zebra and quagga mussel. Now, for a little bit of background, these are mussels that came over from Northern Europe in container ships in water, and they are a very pernicious threat. And they start out in the Great Lakes, and they've spread from there. And they do take over water systems. They do plug up municipal and agricultural piping. They are a problem, and they're brought by boat, generally in standing water on boats. The thing is, the seaplanes are not a vector for transferring these as much as people may fear that they are. The objection has always been, well, look, we can inspect boats at the dock. You can't do that with a seaplane. So what we came up with, what Ray came up with is, well, fair enough. We'll write into our procedures that these planes have to land at an airport first, undergo decontamination and inspection, and then proceed to the lake. This is despite the fact that inherently the planes are less of a risk when they go to take off. First of all, they're not in. We're talking about amphibious airplanes, which are planes that can land on land or on water.
Right.
Generally, they're not in the water that long. They come in, they land, do their thing for a few hours, and then they leave. Mm-hmm. It takes a couple days for these things to latch onto outside surfaces. Even if they were to do that, if you ever watch a seaplane take off, that action of the water on the floats, that's just like a pressure washer.
Right.
So anything that may be on there is going to be stripped off just on takeoff. Then you have flight conditions, mm-hmm. which are generally cold, generally windy, mm-hmm. And generally conducive to drying things out. Zebra and quagga mussels can't survive being dried out more than about 30%. And on top of all that, then you have the procedures that we're using in the state of Colorado on our 2 private lakes that you decontaminate the planes anyways. Mm-hmm. So we work with the Department of Natural Resources, and I think they've done some of their own background work and said, yeah, we don't think, we think there's a way around this. So where we're at this year is DNR is actually sitting down at the table with us as partners on this bill, and it's going to be a process bill where basically we come up, hash out the ANS and aquatic nuisance species procedure, what that inspection is going to look like, what the state's role is going to be, that kind of thing, kind of hash that out. Then we're going to set up a study, a stakeholder process where we can look at the various issues that they're concerned about, not just the ANS, but they have some issues with perceived safety questions, which have been answered everywhere else in the state, everywhere else in the country. But with all our partners, we can look at all those and try and figure out what the procedure is going to be to allow them to have access, mm-hmm. and then have DNR to report back to the legislature on that. We're also going to have a section in there that kind of clarifies an emergency exemption for the firefighting use, so we can at least get some of these planes in here for that purpose. So it's not everything that we want. We would, of course, like access, like everybody else has. Mm-hmm. But what this does is it gets us on the road to that access. And I think the important part to note here is that the Department of Natural Resources is now willing, after several years of Ray's industrious efforts, to sit down to the table and to work with us on a solution. So I think it's fair to say this may be the first glimmer of a yes that we've gotten on this process. So.
Yeah, that's a big kudos. Yeah, so for years of just getting told no, I'm glad you met Kelly and you were able to make some progression, right?
Right.
Now
Mm-hmm.
tell me about this event that you're having.
Well, we have a splash-in. A splash-in is very similar to a fly-in, except we do it on water. Yeah. And down at Lake Meredith, we have a little county park on the north shore of the lake, and we're going to be flying at least 6 aircraft in there on June 2nd. And the aircraft will first go to La Junta Airport, which is about 12 miles away, and they'll do their inspection and make sure that they are completely free of any invasive species before we bring them to the lake. But then we'll bring them to the lake, and they'll be there, and the pilots of seaplanes are notoriously happy, and they just love to give rides and to talk about their aircraft, so people that might be there at the lake can possibly get into a seat. We'll see. Anyway, we've got additional stuff happening. We're going to have barbecue vendors down there, and we'll have a nice tent so that people can get out and out of the sun as well. And one other thing, a surprise that we're working on is that there is a World War II vintage aircraft that is a flying boat that might make an appearance.
Oh, that's so exciting.
And we are very excited about that. That's going to be a wonderful, if it does happen, it will be the largest aircraft ever to land on a body of water in the state of Colorado.
How exciting.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, I just want to give a real quick shout out to our Seaplane bill sponsors this year, Senators Ray Scott and Nancy Todd. Senator Todd's been phenomenal in this throughout the years. And in the House, we have Javon Melton and Lori Sane. So again, bipartisan. This isn't a Democrat versus Republican issue.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you on today. I really appreciate all of these bills that we've got going on, and I hope all of these pass for you. Thank you so much for joining us for Aviation Week here on Connect and Collaborate. Have a great day.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.